Oh, David, that reminds me. Do you hear about Maya He?
M- Maya who?
Maya ha ha. Never mind.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special episode of Power Platform Connections where you may be thinking, why is it just David? Where's Hugo? Well, today we're going to turn the tables, and this is not just going to be any old interview. No, no, no. Today's the moment we've all been waiting for. The moment we're finally going to get the questions answered. Is he man or machine? So today we're going to interview the host, the other co-host, Hugo Bernier. Hugo,
Oh,
could
hi.
you
I didn't see
yeah.
you there.
That's how every meeting starts with us, I think, usually. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hugo Bernier. I am a principal program manager in the community success team.
As you can tell, it's just Hugo and I today. What we're going to do over the next few weeks is we're going to have a couple episodes dedicated to meet your hosts. So today, I've got the honor of interviewing our very dear Hugo Bernier. So Hugo, you had already mentioned that you're a community program manager for Microsoft. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your history, and remember, we only have 7 hours.
Fine. I'll just keep it to the early years. I grew up in Quebec City. My first language was French. I moved to Ontario to learn to speak English because hey, technology comes out in English, and I wanted to really be competitive in IT. And I just never went back. I was so busy with work that I just decided to stay in Ontario. And eventually, I started kind of traveling all over the world to do my work.
You haven't always been in technology. I know for me, my parents joke that I was born with a mouse in my hand. It's been, who I am my entire life. For you, that's not necessarily been the case, right? We've talked about on episodes in the past about, some rogue career you had doing some other things. How did you actually, what are some of the things that you had done, and then how did you get into technology?
I started with technology when I was 12, and I just loved being able to write my own apps, my own games, and things like that. But to me, it was not a career choice. It was just fun, right? It would be like going to my kids today and saying, "Hey, you could get paid, to play Xbox all day." It just didn't make sense to me that it would be a career. So I was going to go in medicine, and to put myself through college and university, I actually worked as a chef. I worked as a baker. I taught computers. I built computers, and I programmed. But that was all to put myself through medical school. One day, one of my friends came over. He was asking me to help him with his homework in computer sciences or software engineering, I guess it's what's called in English. He was just like, "Why are you not going in IT?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Look, we come to you for our homework, and you're not even studying in the field. Why don't you just go in IT? You'll be a natural." And that's when really like the realization was I can get paid to do this. I haven't slept since.
The rest is history,
That's
right?
right.
There's a number of books at the library you can learn about the rest, everybody. So
That's right.
okay, so you were a chef. Now this wasn't like you were just working at a fast food restaurant or something. You had actually you were a chef at a pretty famous place up in Quebec, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a chef de ligne. I was never an executive chef, but I worked in a few restaurants, and I started from dishwasher to always to eventually chef de ligne. So I work in places like the Chateau Frontenac, and which is that big castle that you see, in Quebec, and a whole bunch of other restaurants, including a really fancy pizza restaurant where I fell in love with making pizza.
So what's a chef dingaling? Wait, sorry, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm a chef dingaling. I'm actually just a dingaling is what I get called the most, but I like to be a chef dingaling. Now, what is that you described?
A chef de ligne is basically the person who would coordinate the brigade or the line of cooks that are in the kitchen. So because there's going to be a meat station, there's going to be a fish station, there's going to be a fryer station, a prep station, and so on. And so when you get all the orders or the tickets, you have to kind of coordinate to fire the dishes at the same time. Well, not at the same time, but so that they come out in at the same time on a table, because you don't want someone who, I don't know, ordered a lasagna, which takes like 15 minutes to prepare, and someone who ordered a fish, which takes like minutes to prepare, and for them to get like a 10-minute, 15-minute difference when they receive their dishes. So you have to kind of, and to me, it's interesting because I think that everyone should work in a kitchen at some point, because it really helps with task management, project management, because you don't have time to like sit there and fidget with the steak and until it's cooked. Like you put it on, you take care of the other things, and then there's something in your brain that just says, okay, it's time to flip the steak. It's time to go do these tasks. And that's actually how I apply a lot of those same principles to doing my work. It's just I I don't want to overcook my project, I guess.
There you go. So instead of flipping the script, you're going to flip the steak. I like it.
That's right.
So now you do a lot of cooking still, obviously. You enjoy it. I know you and I have been on trips together where you've done some cooking. We did some pizza cooking together, which was fun. And you've traveled a lot. So two questions for our audience so they kind of have something to talk about a little bit when we see them at upcoming events. Favorite place to visit, favorite item to cook.
I think I'm impartial to Singapore. I lived in Singapore for over a year, and it was actually to work on a SharePoint project. I would go back in a heartbeat. I recently, a couple of years ago, just before COVID, I went back, and I just again, it brought back all the good memories of being in Singapore. People are great. The weather is insanely hot, but the food is really what I love about it. It's just you can go to the most remote food court somewhere or a hawker center. The food is just going to be amazing because it's people who have dedicated their life to perfecting one dish or a few
Yeah,
dishes, and it's insane. Favorite thing to cook? Hmm. I think I have a pizza oven in the backyard, and we make pizzas for the neighborhood. The neighbors know when pizza is happening because they can smell it. It's not as much about the food as it is about getting together with people. I've always said that cooking is like alchemy, right? But instead of trying to make gold, you're building memories. You're doing something that people will say years down the road. Wow, I remember having this dish at this restaurant. Or I've had people like from the family saying, "Hey, 30 years ago you made this dish and it was so good. I still remember it." And immediately you'll be transported back to that moment. And so that's kind of what I love about food and cooking.
that's cool. So I don't think that trend for you has really changed, right? So if we talk about that for a moment, you enjoy the cooking. I know you said that in the backyard you've got a pizza stone that you do in the pool, and so you're constantly kind of hosting, and a lot of that is to do with being able to just bring people together. Fast forward to technology and your life in it now, and we have this amazing community that you are part of and that you help care for and contribute to. So I can see the shift there, or I should say the connection there, right, between what you were doing with food and what you're doing in the community. Talk a little bit about how much community means to you on this landscape as opposed to the cooking side of things.
I'm autistic, and that means I'm not one to want to be in situations where it gets too peoply for me, right? I prefer one-on-one interactions where I can have kind of meaningful connections, as opposed to getting together in a large group of people. And when I started in IT, I was very much that person that if you didn't understand what I was talking about in IT, you were just wasting my time. And eventually, I started working more as a management consultant with McKinsey and Company, and where I really learned to talk business and technology to people and really understand what are the things that people care about, and how do we translate the things they care about into goals, and how do we translate the goals into features and functions. In doing so, I kind of learned to connect with people, but I also learned that everybody comes from a very unique perspective. Everybody, again, they all have their history of how they got to what they're doing today, and to me, it's all about celebrating those unique perspectives. The majority of Power Platform people were not, brought up to be developers. They come from a different background. But also, I think it's important give the opportunity to other people to actually be elevated.
A lot of us in the community have common interests. It's kind of funny. I was smirking and laughing when you said you don't like when things get too peoply because, and I thought, well, that's why we do so much together, because that's the nicest thing that someone's called me in a long time is a people or person. Right? But we do tend to travel in packs, right? So one thing that someone may say is, well, how come you and David do so much together? And I mean, I know because anybody compared to me is going to look better, right? But maybe answer that question for the folks, because they may see us doing a lot together, and there's a method to the madness.
Before I got diagnosed with autism, I was really trying to understand, like, why am I different, right, in terms of how I interact with people, and kooky or weird or whatever expression you want to use. And so I learned a lot about how the brain works and how to communicate, and because autistic people have a problem with looking at you in the eyes. And so I learned to try to I think the term is called masking, but I learned to mask, and I learned to emulate some of the behaviors that maybe a neurotypical person would follow. So just with how I engage with people and things like that. And then I learned about presentation skills and how the brain works when you start watching a presentation, and how after about 9 minutes of the presentation, your attention span, or the audience's attention span, starts dropping. So I've always been a big fan of, if you want people to stay awake the whole time, it's a good idea to introduce something after 10 minutes that will wake people up. So make a joke, do something silly, bring some emotion, but also having another speaker helps. And the great thing about having another speaker is that if you forget what you're going to say, the other speaker can take over for a moment without being awkward. And so you and I started doing our first presentation together, where I explained all these boring principles about how people's brains work and stuff like that. And we really started doing presentations where we just kind of play off of each other, and kind of send it back and forth to each other, and it keeps it entertaining, it keeps it fun, and people don't have time to get bored, because by the time they get bored, hopefully the presentation's over.
You said, someone else I can get over to someone else so it doesn't be awkward, and I can get someone else to fill in the gaps where I'm not able to fill in. And so I'm still wondering, why are you doing so? I get, but also Hugo, I think we like you said, we play off each other, but we're also not afraid to make fun of ourselves, have fun, be joking, and all that, right? So it's powerful there. You'd mentioned neurodivergent, or you'd mentioned neuronormal,
Neurotypical,
neuro, whatever.
but they're all valid.
Yeah, sorry. Let's talk about, as you've gotten more into the community, you've done more in the spotlight, right? Because as our roles, we help lift others up, and that's one of the things that you and I love, is being able to help lift others up. But with that could possibly come some imposter syndrome. So how have you dealt with that? Have you battled it? And how do you help keep it to the point where you're not afraid to keep doing stuff in the community?
That's something I've been very open about, because when I first started Microsoft, I've been at Microsoft for 2 years. When I first started at Microsoft, I was brought in as the first official cloud solution architect for Power Apps and Power Platform. There was other CSAs before who worked in Power Platform, but I was the first one to have that title. And I have to say, like, the first few weeks, actually first few months that I was working at Microsoft, when my phone would ring out of the blue, I was like, okay, this is it. Like, they figured out I don't know what I'm doing, and they're calling to fire me. They're calling to say, we made a mistake. This is really awkward. We're gonna need to let you go. And that call never happened, fortunately. But and this is something where I was really struggling with. Well, why is this happening? Like, why do I feel this way? And so I'm always trying to learn about how the brain works, and I learned more about imposter syndrome, and how if you're constantly trying to keep yourself up to date with technology, it's kind of like, I think Scott Hanselman describes it the best. He says, imagine you're going to swim in the ocean, and you're just going as far as you can, where you're not touching the ground anymore. You're just kind of where you have to struggle to keep afloat. That's really what imposter syndrome is about. You're constantly trying to learn more. You're constantly trying to do more, and the more you learn, the more you realize there's so much more to learn. I know so little. Like, why did I get this role at Microsoft? Or why are people making a deal about me presenting on this topic? Or why do I even have the right to talk about this topic? The interesting thing about imposter syndrome is that there are Nobel Prize winners who felt the same way. And Einstein, in fact, felt the same way. He couldn't understand why people made such a big deal about him being smart and everything. Because as far as he was concerned, he was not that smart. He was not doing anything special. And I'm not comparing myself to Einstein by any means, but this has been something that I've been really open about because when you join Microsoft, very quickly you're encouraged to also buddy with newcomers in the organization. And so very quickly I started talking to new people who were joining Microsoft, and that's something I would openly talk about. I would say, hey, like, do you feel like you don't know anything? And invariably people were like, oh my God, thank you for recognizing this. I thought it was just me, right? And the more I would talk to people in the community, they would also say same thing. It's like, oh, I don't know anything. I don't feel right about presenting this. And again, this is just a quality of if you're trying to stay up to date and you're trying to learn more, you're never going to be at a point where you're like, oh, I know so much, I'm so smart, because again, you're going to realize how much more there is to do.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so let's transition a little bit into tech just for a couple of minutes, and we'll close out here soon. What is your favorite Power Platform product?
It's kind of like my favorite child. I started with SharePoint way back when it was called Tahoe, and then at one point, I think it was when CRM 1.2 or 1.3, I can't remember. I was asked to actually add CRM into SharePoint. I learned about it, and I learned how you could pretty much make it do whatever you needed to do because it was so flexible. When Power Platform started, it was really kind of evolution of Dynamics, and I'm a big fan of model-driven apps because again, that's kind of the legacy from Dynamics 365 and the ability to build business rules and to build forms really quickly. Huge fan of Power Automate and Power Virtual Agent just because of how it makes it easy for you to integrate with the other applications. But I was brought in this team for Power Pages. And so Power Pages holds a special place in my heart because all the other Power Platform products, once you've reached the limits of what it can do out of the box, you're stuck, right? But with Power Pages, once you've reached the limits of what Power Pages can do, you're left with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you know how to leverage these tools, you can actually make it whatever you need it to be. In fact,
Almost
some
no
of the other,
limits, right?
yeah, no limits. Of course, it's not to say that every maker is going to be able to build JavaScript, HTML, CSS. But again, Power Pages to me has always been the tool that is designed for Fusion teams to work together, right? The makers, the pro developers, and the IT administrators to work together to build a publicly accessible website that allows you to connect to your data securely. And then that sends it back to all the other cool stuff that we've talked about, like Dataverse, Power Automate, model-driven apps, Power Virtual Agent, all these other stuff. So I don't have a favorite, but I have one that I maybe like more than the others.
We won't tell your sons about that
That's right.
and your daughter, right? One last question for you. You and I work as a team, part of a bigger team in caring for the community, trying to empower the community. Usually we'll ask, what's your advice to the community? To if you want to speak more or you want to do this, but I'm going to flip it on you and say, what is your ask for the community? Whether it be for them to come to us with something or for them to be empowered to do something. If you could say, community, I would love to see you do XYZ, ABC, what would that be?
One of the things that I think is really hard for people when they get started in the community is they feel that they don't have a place or they don't have a voice. Or they're like, oh, it's not my place to say this, or someone else has already said this, so why would I say this, right? I know when I started, I felt the same way, where it was like, like I've been working, like again, I by that time I had been working with SharePoint for over 20 years, right? I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's saying, "Why don't you blog? Why don't you, do that stuff?" I was like, I don't have anything to say. He's like, "Dude, you've forgotten more about SharePoint than most people know in their lifetime, and you keep on thinking that you have to write from your perspective of the level where you're at, but there's always going to be people who are starting today that started yesterday, and every little morsel that you have of wisdom that you've learned, you can share it with people." And I was like, "Yeah, I know, but I don't want to be like, oh, I'm so smart, let me share my wisdom." He's like, no, like, think of it of leave a note to yourself, right? So when you what that's what I started doing when I wrote a blog post. It would start with, "Here's a note to myself on how to do this," and I would never say, "This is the best way" or "This is the only way." I would say, "This is my way," so that nobody would be able to take that away from me. And then the more I would start searching on the internet for a solution or something, and then the more my own blog post would come back, I was like, "Oh, okay, I forgot that I wrote about this," which is a weird feeling, by the way. So write for yourself first, or create content for yourself. I don't like to do videos. You like to do videos instead of writing blog. So write content for yourself, and because someone will benefit from it. And if someone else has written about this topic, that shouldn't stop you from being able to write about it. Just don't take the credit for what they've written. But you can always say, "Hey, this other person has done this, and this is my perspective. This is how I'm using what this person's written about." Or, just again, apply your own industry, your own expertise, your own role.
Perspective.
Yeah, perspective. That's a good word. And just write from that. And again, I think that there's always going to be people who are going to benefit from it. And then the other thing too is because I had a hard time also with social media, like retweeting to me was like that was cheating. Right? It's like, well, why would I just take a tweet and retweet? That's not my own original thought. And again, my friend was like, well, people choose to follow you because they trust your advice, they trust your opinion. When you say, "I've read this or I've looked at this and here's something that I think is important," you're basically helping them maybe prioritize from the bazillions of articles that are out there to something that you feel is important, and that's their choice to be able to follow you and to trust your advice. So don't take that away from them.
Great advice. Well, everybody, Hugo, thank you for letting us take a little time today to turn the tables and put the heat lamp. See what I did there? It's a cooking reference. Heat lamp on you instead of spotlight. Right. So, yeah.
You could have grilled
Anyways.
me.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you for letting us feature you as the guest today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was awesome.
It was on your calendar. We didn't really have a choice.
I You're next.
All right, everybody, it's time to take a look at the amazing articles, videos, and blogs that you wrote this last week. Now, if you'd like us to highlight the work that you're doing, make sure you use that hashtag. Which hashtag? Power Platform Connects. That one right there. Use it, and we will scour the interwebs for all the amazing work that you're doing, and we'll talk about it. What's up first, Hugo?
Thank you, David. Our first blog post is by Dennis Huderber, and where he talks about page approvals with changes. And so, what Dennis wanted to do is he wanted to use the article that Microsoft has written. It's a support articles that shows you how to configure page approval settings in the site pages. And out of the box, what it does, or the article, what it does, is it shows you how to set up the content approval for the selected page and how to start the first response for an approval task for the approver. And then it handles the outcome of the approval to either approve or reject the page changes. But what Dennis wanted to do was to actually improve the list of approvers because he didn't want to have a static list of individuals or ask for the list of individuals at the start of the approval. He wanted to use a security group that's nested within the SharePoint group. So that's the site owners. The second thing that he wanted to do was to improve the link that is sent, and that's what we see on the screen here. Let's see right here. Wanted to change the link to actually show the page itself, and so that you can actually view the changes.
it's a really great in-depth article because this is a commonly asked for scenario. I just appreciate how he goes such in-depth, step by step, because that really is helpful when you're trying to understand and learn all this stuff.
Our next article is by Geetha, and so what this is actually a few tweets that Geetha has sent. But what she was showing is 3 productivity tips to supercharge your productivity by really staying on top of things like messages, emails, and meetings. And she's using PowerPoint templates. And so she's got 3 examples. One is if you're running late to a meeting, you can actually use a Cloudflow to check ahead of your meetings and notify your next meeting with a custom message. The next sample that she has is to keep your calendars up to date by using a Cloudflow to scan your calendar for canceled meetings, and it removes them and notifies you on Teams. I actually use this myself for my meetings because I like to actually see my calendar getting emptier and emptier as meetings get canceled. And the last one is to schedule a reply for a later time. So it's, you can schedule a reply in Outlook to send a message, but now you can actually do that using a Cloudflow to schedule a reply via Teams in a Teams message. And so that's a great way to do that. So those are all great samples. There's tons of other templates that are available to you, but thank you, Geetha, for showing us those samples. And I hope that you'll put these samples to good use. Our next article is by Lindsay Shelton, and she shows how to use Power Automate to send an email reminder 24 hours before an event. And so this is a great example of people in the community working together. There was someone who reached out to Lindsay and said that she had an idea on how to use Power Automate, but she wasn't sure how to make it happen. And so obviously, Lindsay being who she is, it immediately spiked her adrenaline and she started searching for triggers and ways to do this. She was really excited about doing it. And what she started with was using kind of the group events connector to actually get notified when a group event gets created, and then would go look at a calendar 24 hours in advance to remind people. And she figured, hey, it would be nice if we could do that the same way Eventbrite does it. And she says, yeah, it would be nice, but it wasn't that easy because the first thing that Lindsay found out is that, well, there was not a template that was available already. So she figured, hey, great opportunity for me to blog. And then she had to use again the when there's a new group event, and all she had to do was to figure out the group ID so she could fetch that from Azure AD. And then once the trigger was in place, the next trouble she ran into was that the date time format that she receives was really not the format that she needed to send the email. So she used a formula wizard to help her get the formula that worked for her, and so that she could compose that into kind of a message, set that as the right date, and she used the add days function to actually add -1 day to pick the day before today or before the day before the event. And then she sent the email on that date. So it's a great example of, again, people reaching out to people in the community, asking for help, and then giving opportunities for someone like Lindsay to actually create some content.
Yeah, and you know what? I think Lindsay just experienced a little something over the weekend, right? I think she became MVP. So
That's right.
congratulations, Lindsay. We're very proud of you.
Congratulations. Yeah, it's that kind of hard work that leads to getting an MVP, so it's well deserved. Our next article is by Natalie Linders. She shows how to do another quick tip on how to remove blank items in a compose. So you use compose when you want to create messages. Let's say you want to log a message or you want to email a message to someone, and sometimes you have blank items. Let's say, for example, that you are trying to populate an address, right, where there's a second address line, or maybe you don't want to send a message if the message is empty. And traditionally, the way you would do that is you'd probably have to resort to a lot of branched if statements, but then you end up having to create the same flow to send the message with the empty statement or without the empty statement, depending on how the flow goes.
So I really like also here, Hugo, how Kat and Natalie were working together. We constantly talk about the power of collaborative opportunity. Don't let geography separate you. We are a connected community, global. So reach out and talk to one another. Always ask if someone's willing to collaborate with you and willing to work together. And you never know what you might find.
And speaking of MVPs being nominated, so we just talked about Lindsay Shelton being who we mentioned before in a previous episode. She received her MVP this weekend. Michael Magel is also someone who found out he was an MVP this weekend. Congratulations, Michael. Michael reached out to us and mentioned us, so we thought we'd take a moment to celebrate his new MVP. It was a surprise for him. I think he received it on April 1st, and he wasn't sure whether we were playing a prank on him, but it's not. It's certainly well deserved by Michael.
Yep, it's a real deal. And congratulations to all our MVPs. We're very proud of all the work that you're doing, and our community would not be possible to do what it's doing without you all. So thank you all very, very much.
Absolutely. That's all for the articles for us this week, David.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks again for tuning in. This is a special episode where we got to kind of flip the script and turn the tables and interview our host today, learning more about him. If you would also like us to include any of the amazing work that you're doing in the community, whether it be videos or articles or blogs, anything like that, samples, you name it, we'd love to highlight it. Make sure you use that hashtag Power Platform Connects, and we will make sure to scour all the interwebs for it. Hugo, there's another thing that can be done as well, right? What is that?
Absolutely. You can actually join our community by going to aka.ms/join the community, and you can become a community member, contribute to forums, answer questions, ask questions, and who knows, you might even become a super user if you ask or if you answer a lot of questions and help a lot of people. We're all in this together. Let's help each other and let's share our knowledge.
Well done. Awesome. Thanks, Hugo. See you. Bye.
Bye. This is a very deep, meaningful Power Platform
Connections, but
connection.
I'm glad you pay attention.
Wow. Stay
All right, everybody. So this is gonna be one of those days. Hi, everybody.
I'm going tweet. Well, fine, okay.